Have you ever struggled to understand someone because of their accent? Or maybe you've been curious about the different ways English is spoken around the world. For example, listen to this Scottish accent.
The Honourable Gentleman, what work is being done to make sure that this place is more accessible, particularly for some of our colleagues who have a disability?
Here.
Well, very popular today. I'm saying that a number of parliamentary colleagues who have disabilities do find it quite difficult getting around certain parts of the state. Given that we're doing this refurbishment work, what can be done to make sure that those with a disability are able to move around more freely and the place is accessible?
Could you understand it? If you could, you probably listened to a lot of English. And it's normal for you, but if you didn't, it doesn't matter. Because in this episode, we are going to share some tips and tricks with you guys to improve your English listening. And we will help you understand different accents. In our channel, you can find everything related to English language learning in a very casual podcast discussion with vivid examples. To elaborate on this idea, we're having an expert on the subject. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Dr. Ethan Hayes. He's a renowned linguist, an accent coach, and has a PhD in applied linguistics. Welcome to the podcast, Doctor.
Thanks so much, Mark. I'm really excited to be here and discuss this topic. It's one that's so important for English learners today, especially with how interconnected the world is now.
Absolutely. So, Ethan, to begin with, accents are something that many English learners are a bit unsure about. They can be a barrier to understanding, and sometimes learners get intimidated by them. What would you say to someone who feels anxious about understanding different English accents?
That is a great question, Mark, and it's one that I hear all the time. Well, first of all, I want to tell English learners not to worry. They are very normal. Accents are amazingly diverse, and English has many varieties, whether it's British, American, Australian, or even regional dialects within those countries. So, the trick is patience and exposure. Time is what this takes, but the more you listen, the easier it will become. The more you're exposed to these accents, the less intimidating they will be. For example, you watched a lot of American movies and I am pretty now that you can understand it completely, but you have a problem with the British accent, maybe because you haven't heard so many British accents in your life.
So really, it's just the process of getting used to it, right? It is like learning to become comfortable with a new sound. But let's dig a little deeper. Can you tell us a little bit about why English has so many accents and dialects in the first place? I mean, it can be overwhelming to hear so many variations of the language.
Why not? English is a world language, and its development has occurred differently in every country. The biggest factor in the diversity in accents is history and geography. Once English-speaking settlers migrated to another part of the world, their language began to change based on the local culture, climate, and even language contact. British English, therefore, is molded by history and the unique social history of the British Isles. American English was influenced by immigrants and contact with Native American languages and other various cultural influences.
Wow, that's fascinating. It's like each accent tells its own story. I got your point. So, when it comes to understanding these different accents, what's the best approach for learners who may not be familiar with them? I want you to be concise and explain it in examples if possible.
For sure. Listen very carefully. The best method, in my opinion, is to expose yourself to as many different accents as possible. And I don't just mean listening to them, but actively engaging with them. For example, watch movies, shows, or YouTube videos in different accents. If you're listening to someone with a heavy Scottish accent, for instance, try listening carefully to how they pronounce words differently. Or next time you watch a movie or YouTube video, pick up something different from only the American accent. And this is simple. I know everyone can do it. And most importantly, practice repeating phrases or words after them. This is the second method, which is called active engagement and mimicking. Let's take a simple sentence like, "How are you?" For instance, if you're trying to understand a British accent, you might hear it pronounced like,
"How are you?"
with a very soft and almost dropped R. Now, if you want to practice, listen to a native speaker saying that, maybe from a British show or video, and try to repeat it exactly the same way.
I see. So really practicing speaking and mimicking the accents is important too, not just listening.
Exactly, Mark. And that's one thing many English learners don't realize. Speaking along with native speakers helps your brain adjust to the rhythm, stress, and intonation of different accents. It's like a muscle you need to train. I always tell my students that it's okay if you don't sound exactly like the person, but aim for understanding and the rhythm of their speech. The more you do it, the more natural it will feel.
I like that advice. I want to tell a short story here. I have a cousin, he is 13, but he can speak in 5 different accents. I was astonished, so I asked his father, and he told me that he had different friends from different places at school. He learned it that way.
Cool. That is fantastic.
So, let's make it a little bit more practical. If we consider a couple of different accents, say British and American English, what are some key differences that learners should be aware of?
Great question. So, let's start with pronunciation. One of the biggest differences between British and American English is the way we pronounce certain vowel sounds. For example, the word dance, in British English, it's pronounced with a broad A, like dance, while in American English, it's pronounced with a flat A, like dens. Another example is the word schedule. In American English, the SCH sound is pronounced like esk, so schedule, while in British English, it's pronounced headule. So, a lot of it is in the vowels.
That's so interesting. What about accents from other parts of the world, like Australia or South Africa? Do you find them more difficult for learners to understand?
True. Accents such as Australian or South African English can be tricky due to a particular rhythm and stress pattern sometimes involved, which may be unfamiliar to learners. For example, Australians tend to elide sounds, and the rhythm is slightly more sing-song than American English. South African English is a bit more formal in some regions than in other areas due to influences from Dutch and local languages, and learners will encounter some other uses of pronunciation, particularly with vowels.
Wow, this is such a deep dive into accent. So much to absorb. But to wrap things up, what final tip would you give our listeners when it comes to tackling the challenge of understanding different accents?
I would say, do not worry. Accents are part of what makes English so rich and interesting. Let it go and take it a step at a time. You will have ample opportunity to listen regularly, hear many different accents, and be afraid to ask someone to repeat or explain again if you do not understand something. It's all part of the process, and your listening skills will really improve with time.
Fantastic advice. I am sure that the listeners are going to take a lot from this episode. Thank you so much for coming in today, Dr. Ethan. It's been great having you on.
Thank you, Mark. It's been great chatting with you and your listeners. I hope everyone feels more confident about understanding and embracing English accents now.
Remember, understanding accents have so many methods, but we mentioned the most important ones here. Well, for all our listeners, don't forget to subscribe to the ASA English Podcast for more episodes like this one. Until next time, keep practicing, and remember, accents don't define your ability to communicate. You just make it even more exciting. Intimidated. Feeling afraid or lacking confidence due to the influence of something or someone. Example. She felt intimidated by the complex language used in the meeting. Elaborate. To explain something in more detail or with greater complexity. Example. The teacher asked him to elaborate on his ideas during the presentation. Mimicking. Imitating someone's actions or speech, often to learn or understand better. Example. The child was mimicking his father's gestures while they worked together. Exposed. To be made familiar with or introduced to something. Example. Traveling abroad exposed her to many different cultures and languages. Engaging. Actively participating or being involved in something. Example. The speaker used engaging examples to keep the audience interested. Intonation. The rise and fall of the voice when speaking, affecting the meaning of words or phrases. Example. His intonation changed when he asked a question, signaling curiosity. Rhythm. The pattern of sounds in speech or music, usually defined by timing and stress. Example. She practiced the rhythm of the language until it felt natural. Pronunciation. The way in which words are spoken or pronounced. Example. Correct pronunciation of words is crucial when learning a new language. Elide. To omit or leave out certain sounds or syllables in speech, often for ease of pronunciation. Example. In fast speech, some people elide the T in words like water. Absorb, to take in or soak up information, energy, or knowledge. Example, he was eager to absorb all the information from the lecture. Ample, more than enough, plentiful. Example, there was ample time to finish the project before the deadline.